Welcome to Streets and Eats, the podcast where we want to inspire your next trip by telling you about some fantastic destinations and the best food to eat while you're there. Now remember, until the world opens completely back up and you feel safe to travel again, use this time to just research and plan. That's what we're here for. In this episode, we're going to take you to one of our favorite countries in Europe, France.
Why is it our favorite? Well, to be honest, it wasn't at first. You know, there was always that stereotype of the French waiter. And actually, it even happened to us on one of our very first trips into France. In Orange, we were at a outside cafe. One of my friends ordered the fruit de saison, which was the fruit of the season. He got one banana on a plate.
Half a banana.
Half a banana on a plate. Still in the peel.
And it cost like 16 francs or whatever.
Yeah. At that time, which was about $4 or $5.
Too much.
And then when we went to pay after everything was done, he grabbed all of our money, which was needing change, and disappeared. Just disappeared. Never saw him again. I guess that was his tip. Anyway, with that experience and just, the French did have a reputation of not being too tolerant of travelers. That has really, I think, changed a lot, don't you think?
Well, I know it has.
Yeah,
because
we've experienced it for sure.
We have experienced it, but they also had an actual campaign.
That's right.
A French campaign back in the
80s, I think.
80s or 90s. I don't know when the campaign was, but a French person told me about it, where the whole country was like, come on, people, we need tourists, be nice to them. We want them to spend their money here. I mean, who wouldn't?
Right.
Tourism is a huge moneymaker.
But luckily it didn't stop us. And now we love France.
Okay. So, if you're thinking France, where do you need to go first? Paris. Not only is it the capital city, it's the largest city, and it's the most well-known city. Is it my favorite part of France? No. But I do love it. It's gorgeous. And there's still tons of things to do there. What we've done is we've kind of split out. I mean, there's so much to do in Paris that can you really do it in one trip? Well,
no way.
I think
you stay for a month.
Well, not only that, but unless you really love cities, who wants to just pound the pavement for a month?
Right.
So I kind of think, even though we're counting it as one trip, there's so much to do and see there that I would think that you might want to break it into 2 trips or 3 trips, or fly into Paris for any of the trips and then rent your car and go from there. But no matter what, go to Paris. So what can you do there? Well, the first things people do, of course, are, everybody knows about them. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre Museum, the d'Orsay Museum, Arc de Triomphe, Montmartre, Sacré-Cœur, Champs-Élysées. These are all names that you've probably heard of. And if you haven't, and you start looking into France, you're going to see tons of them. One thing that people have always wanted to do is go to the Moulin Rouge. Well, there's nothing more touristy and probably more expensive than going to the Moulin Rouge. The Moulin Rouge is an old burlesque show. I think it's kind of a bar restaurant, which you can still technically get food, but I certainly would not recommend it. You're going to pay enough to go on this trip to begin with.
Right. Well, it seems like most of the ways people go there is through a tour of some sort, and it's usually included a meal or a snack and like a half a bottle of champagne or something like that.
Yeah. And I do think, honestly, you can buy your tickets yourself, but it is easier to get the tickets beforehand on a tour. We could certainly put a link in our website on the show notes for that. But we went once. It was fun.
Yeah.
It's
a good
fun.
experience.
It's a good experience to do for
one of those once
time.
of a lifetime experiences.
If you've been to Vegas and seen the shows there, you may not need to do it.
It may be a lot like the Rockettes too in New York City, which we haven't done, but
I think it's a little bit more risque.
It's more risque.
I think they show a little bit more skin.
This is not for kids.
Yeah, it maybe is not where you want to take your preteens, especially.
It's a pretty good show.
It's a pretty good show. Yeah, I mean, you will like it, but it is touristy. The Eiffel Tower. I mean, you're gonna hit lines to go up the Eiffel Tower. You can walk up versus taking the elevator. But no matter how you go, you're going to go up high in the city and have great views. My daughter's afraid of heights, and when she was 5, she went up the Eiffel Tower, much to her, and because of her tantrums, my chagrin. I should have waited with her at the bottom. She could have looked up and enjoyed it from below. But it is, if you're afraid of heights, it is a little scary. There's so many museums in Paris. The big ones, the Louvre and the d'Orsay, are, unmissable. You have to go there. Again, though, that you have to buy your tickets ahead of time and be prepared for lines and just sort of be patient because there's going to be tons of thousands of people there.
And you can get a multi-day Paris pass that will include, if it doesn't include all of the museums, it includes a discount. And for some of them, the bigger ones especially, has a skip the line type thing. Yeah. So that's a good way to do it.
The Arc de Triomphe. Well, you don't really have to go to the Arc de Triomphe. You can see it from a lot of different places in Paris. It's a big arc, but it is fun to go to. It describes, some of the battles, and
Napoleon's
it definitely
battles.
tells about...
You can go up to the top of it as well if you want to suck in car fumes. And
but it's good view. It's worth going to the top of it. I mean, we've gone
anytime you can get above the rooftops in Paris. I mean, it's the view to die for. Maybe not the best from the Arc de Triomphe, but it's a good one.
That is a very well-known place where scammers hang out, though. What they will do when they're famous scams is they will have 3 people, and one is a man who runs up behind you with a wedding ring and says, ma'am, you dropped your wedding ring, which of course isn't yours, but you can't help but look at it. Even if you know this is a scam, you are going to look at the ring.
Because he holds it up in your face.
I mean, you're going to. And then the next thing you know, you're surrounded by people.
Well, the next thing you do is you check your wedding ring. Did I really lose my wedding ring? And that's what they're looking for. Your wedding ring. And they make an evaluation right then of, is this a person that has money? And then they will tag you and follow you back to your hotel, where then they can rob the hotel. That's the big scam with that one, with the wedding ring.
Well, they also just
or pickpocket you if
the
opportunity arises.
At any rate, be very careful and always be with people if you're going to the Arc de Triomphe. Plus, getting there, you have to cross the road, which, if you go over the road, is death-defying. Yeah. If you go under the road, then, well, you're safe.
Right. Well, and another thing about the scammers, leave your expensive jewelry at home.
Yeah, absolutely. We also saw someone get mugged in the Louvre, right outside the Louvre, waiting for a tour bus to pick them up. So, like Jim said, just be very careful and wary. It's a big city. There's people that need money. Of course, they're going to do things they need to do.
They know that the tourists are there, and they know where they're at.
Exactly.
Have some sense.
One of the places that people love to go, and I wanted to go, I couldn't wait to go the first time I went to Paris, quite some time ago, is Montmartre. It's a square that's beautiful. It's got outdoor seating for cafes. It's got the artists that are painting there, and it's very picturesque. But I would have to say that as time has gone by, if you keep your distance and you snap a few pictures, I guess it's okay, but I don't know.
The artists don't want you taking their picture.
They don't. And
they get upset about
it. And it's very expensive to sit there. You have to pay just to sit at a table, let alone get something to drink. And so it's going to cost you 3 times the amount of having a coffee there than it would pretty much anywhere else in Paris. If that's what you want to do, by all means, do it. It's one of those things. But on the other hand, I've lost a lot of...
Definitely a place to walk through and enjoy the ambiance of it as much as you can, but it's not somewhere you want to spend a lot of time, really.
There's so many places like that throughout Paris that you don't have to go there, is my point.
Right.
They do have a beautiful cathedral up on the hill, Sacré-Cœur, which is the big, white, beautiful cathedral, and it's got great views as well. That's a nice place to go. And if you want to go shopping, gotta go to the Champs-Élysées. And there's just nothing like walking the Champs-Élysées.
It's quite the experience.
From designer fashions to
1 hour Ferrari rentals.
Right? right outside the Macron place, they were renting the
Yes.
Ferraris that you
Yeah.
could just drive up and down that street. Very interesting. But there's tons to do. One of our favorite things to do, and I've done it a few times, I don't know how many times you've done it, is take the Seine cruise. You do have to listen to a little commentary, but it's just so nice to be on the boat.
Got out on deck and just watch Paris go by.
Yeah,
It's very
I like
cool.
that a lot.
It's very cool.
Another way you can enjoy the Seine is just to sit on the side of it. This is Erica told me to say this. Sit on the side of it with a picnic, a little charcuterie basket,
A baguette, some
and
cheese.
some wine, and yeah,
Go out to Pont Neuf and just sit on the bank. Yeah. Watch the world go by. And it's a good idea. It's a good tip for a reason.
yeah. How romantic, right? That's what France is. Of course, while you're there, you're gonna want to eat. We have some really good restaurants to recommend. Some are a
Places we
little,
go back to.
yeah, we've gone back to them every time actually, and even though they could be sometimes a little on the fringe of touristy, they're well worth it. The problem is when you're in the center of France, the center of Paris, there's going to be tourists there.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going to go to a restaurant typically that
You have to
doesn't have
get pretty
any
far
foreigners
out.
there.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the goal. You want good food, right? The first one we found is right across from Notre Dame, and it's called Le Frégate, which is the frigate, a big boat, and they serve a daily menu. And we always go to get the steak au poivre and the frites.
Yes.
So it's a steak with a pepper sauce
steak and French fries.
and French fries. And it's just really good. And it's in a good place. And it's so cute. It's a small little restaurant.
Well, you get that one, but I always get the steak Roquefort
And yeah, you get the Roquefort.
because I
That's true.
love Roquefort cheese on my steak. That's with fries, of course, as well.
Yeah.
It's a real heart stopper. Sop up that cheese sauce with the
But
French
you've
fries.
been pounding the pavement all day. So
And you mix a little red wine in with it, and it cuts through the cheese, so it's okay.
maybe we should have that for dinner.
Yeah.
Another one that we love to go to, and this one is, I would say, pretty touristy.
Of the ones that we would mention, it's probably the most touristy, but it also has
It's
a
got
lot of
good
French people
food,
eating there.
and it's so yummy. It's called Le Soufflé. It's a restaurant that only makes soufflé. So they have
It's near
something
the
like
Louvre, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's right across
right
from
across
the
from the
Louvre. And so they have I think 6 or 7, maybe more, savory
Savories.
souffle.
Mushroom, asparagus in the season. Lots of good
Yeah,
stuff.
well, it changes. That's
It's
the good thing
seasonal.
about France. It's seasonal. With meat, without meat, cheese, of course.
I guess that's a good tip if you're looking for tourist restaurants, or if you're looking for restaurants in tourist areas. If you can find the ones that have seasonal menus, they're probably going to be a better quality as well.
Absolutely. And then, so what we like to do is we'll get, depends on how many people are with us, but we like to get a number of savory souffles. You know, not necessarily one per person because it can get a little overwhelming, but 2 out of 3 or whatever. And then we follow that up with some sweet souffles.
Right.
But to eat a full savory souffle and a full sweet
You're not gonna
souffle
do
by
it.
yourself, that's a bit much. So you
Really?
really want to do some sharing.
Like one, for 2 people, 1 savory and 1 sweet is a really good way to do it.
For 2
And if you're
people,
still
yeah.
hungry, you can order something else. But it's a pretty big souffle.
And they take about, I think, 20 minutes.
Mm.
But they're making them right there pretty much in front of you. You can see them doing it. It's just delicious. It's well worth going.
Definitely one of our favorites.
And then we found this other one not too long ago. It's called Le Comptoir du Relais. And it's also down by the Pont Neuf in the Notre Dame, along a little block or 2 off the Seine. And this place is just packed outside and in. And there are both French and foreigners there that go to it.
Has such a population that, yes, you're going to get the tourists along with the locals.
But it's so well known that one of the days that we were there was a cooking school. They took their students there, and they had to eat that food because it's so renowned as such a
Right.
good place. So that
Well.
tells me, hey, if teachers are taking their culinary students there, that's a good place to eat.
Yeah.
And we had things like bone marrow
They have
and
a really good terrine. Very,
a French terrine.
very old style. Just really delicious, meaty. Yeah.
And they get you in there. And even though it's right in the center of city and it's very popular, it takes only about an hour to eat, which is kind of nice too, because you can get a lot more touring in. But on your first trip or second trip to Paris, there's some really close things to do nearby too. So we'll talk about those right after Jim tells you a little bit more about some of the cool things to do in Paris.
So while you're in Paris, well, the more times you go, the more you can veer off that tourist path.
Or the more time you have.
And you're not going to return to the Eiffel Tower every time you go. You might go back to the Louvre. I would recommend not trying to do the entire Louvre all in one trip. And the same with the d'Orsay. They're way too large for that. You might piece that out like that. That's a good way to do it. But there's a lot of lesser known things. One of our favorites off the beaten path is the Musée des Arts Forains, which is like an old carnival museum. So they've taken the old organs and music organs and the old Ferris wheels.
And games,
not Ferris wheels, carousels. That's what I'm looking for. There is a small Ferris wheel in there, but it's not one you ride. But the old carnival games, like the horse race with the wooden ball that you throw up into the holes and you race other players across the field. And that's a pretty cool one. They have an old bicycle.
That was my favorite.
Ride, which was my favorite, where the people on the ride are the power for it. And that one's actually quite thrilling.
So you're pedaling the whole time.
Yeah.
But it's old-timey and it's romantic and it's fun and it's quirky.
It's just a cool place. The whole decorations of it is very much like stepping back in time into an old carnival. That's probably one of my favorite places.
You do have to make reservations or go on a tour for that one. That is not something you can just walk up and buy tickets.
Another good place, and a lot of people would put this on their first trip. It depends on what kind of time you have. Or your interest level. But we always like walking through old cemeteries. The older, the better. You really get a good sense of the art of the period. And in some cases, you can really see some interesting tombstones.
Well, how cultural is it? I mean, it changes everywhere you go.
Yeah. So our favorite in Paris, of course, is the Père Lachaise cemetery. Everybody going to Paris usually knows that Jim Morrison is buried in a cemetery in Paris, so they're always looking for which cemetery was it. Well, it's the Père Lachaise. A lot of famous people were buried there. It's probably the largest cemetery and oldest cemetery in Paris. Oscar Wilde was buried there. Chopin
and
tons more. But even if you're not looking for this famous people's burial sites, just the art and the mystique and just the feeling of it.
And it's kind of park-like as well. So it doesn't, you're not walking on sidewalks, you're walking on paths. And so it feels a little bit less
very shady.
City.
And, you're out of the pavement for a while, which is also very nice. Another one of our favorite places to go, and Erica also introduced us to this one, is the Dérolle taxidermy store. Which
is quirky
if you've got
as can be.
Any interest at all in naturalism, animals, insects, things like that, it's a taxidermy, and that's what they have. And you can just go and like check out the different butterflies that they have on display.
Drawers of them.
Beetles, insects of all types, animals of all types, just stuffed into this. It's not a tiny store, but it's not very
multi-level,
large.
but it's not very large.
But what's really cool about it is you can also buy the stuff there. Although I'm not sure what the laws are for bringing anything like that back to the U.S. But there are a lot of cool things on display there. Definitely worth a trip. And if you've got more time on you've come on a second trip or a third trip, definitely a good place to take a cooking lesson.
And I would even argue that nowadays, if we were just going to Paris, we'd probably
I might put it on my first trip. Right.
My first trip early on, probably.
Yeah. We took a couple of lessons there. You took the baking lesson, croissant.
So good.
Although you've not made a croissant for me since then.
No. No, but our cooking lesson was, I took it with my daughters, Devin and Erica, and we had such a good time. I mean, I don't know if all the instructors, but we had I just love this instructor. He was so, and this is sort of bad in a way, stereotypically French. He says to me, mix it. I said, mix it. No, don't stop. Did I say stop? Oh my God, he was cracking me up. He was just so hilarious.
Yeah.
I loved him.
That sounded like a good one. Mine was really good too. I took a
Sauces.
lesson, which we covered making 4 or 5 of the traditional sauces, and have used that knowledge since. But more important than that, they really gave us a lot of really good recommendations on other type of foodie, if you want to use that word, places to go and different restaurants to try other food that you might not have read about in a blog post or a tourist book or one of those, which also ended up becoming one of our favorites, was Le Comptoir de la Gastronomie, which another comptoir, which just means counter, like kitchen counter in French. But here they specialize in foie gras. And it's a very seasonal, very fresh, very, farm to table, if you want to call it that. Delicious food.
Amazing food.
Again, in the Montmartre area, but not up on the hill. So
on Rue de Montmartre.
Rue de Montmartre.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, I mean, foie gras, which maybe isn't the most, best thing to do to get a food, I thought was something that there was no way that I would ever love. But I got to tell you,
it's quite good.
They do it well.
But everything there was good. You didn't have to have foie gras.
And yeah, you don't have to have foie gras. So there's tons of things to do in Paris. And the thing is, you can go back over and over and over again, and you're going to find more and more and more things to do. But like I said before, it's not my favorite place in the country because we've been all over the country, and I tend to like the smaller cities or the places that are just a little off the beaten path where we really get to interact more, I think, with the locals.
Yeah.
So one of the things we started doing was taking road trips there, and we would get a gîte, which is basically the same thing as Airbnb.
Right.
And I'll put the link in the show notes. And they have all kinds of them, and they're cheap. They're cheap. I mean, some of them are as cheap as like 160 euros for the entire 7-day week. That's how much you pay per night. Normally.
A lot of them go seasonally, so it might get more expensive depending on what time of year you're going, but
sure.
It's still a really good way to get accommodations for a week.
No matter what, it's going to be cheaper. And they typically have, of course, everything an Airbnb would have. They have the kitchen, they have a place to park, they have, whatever you need. I don't think we saw any of them with washers and dryers. They don't quite go that far, but they're well
usually
equipped.
Okay stocked as far as cooking materials. Although the one we stayed in Loire Valley didn't have flour.
Yeah, I'm about to tell you this story. So we stayed in this little tiny cottage in the Loire Valley while we wanted to go out and see all the World Heritage castles and just really enjoy the river during the spring. Well, while we were there, we ended up stopping by this one place that grows mushrooms. And so I don't know how many kinds of mushrooms they
3 or
had,
4.
but
they had several, but yeah.
They had several, and we got a bunch, and we started making this this mushroom soup, which the recipe is on our site. And we'd made it before. We learned actually in Japan how to make it. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to have it at our gîte, and we realized to thicken the soup we needed some flour. Well, number one, I couldn't remember how to say flour in French. And we had no idea. So
number 2, we're in the middle of the countryside.
Yeah, there was
no cottage.
There was no
shop anywhere.
Big, huge.
Just a couple of neighbors.
Grocery store. So I went knocking on doors, and the guy next door was so nice. I said, it's in my abysmal French. I was explaining, the French powder you cook with. The French powder you cook with. For bread. And so finally, with all my bumblings, he finally got the point across, and he gave us a cup of flour, which we didn't even need that much. to make our soup. So that was pretty cool. So we suggest, going and finding a place and then using it as your base, staying there the whole week and sort of branching out and doing things. And we did this quite a few times in France. That's what the next trips are about. The first one was in the Loire Valley. We went to Chenonceau, the beautiful castles like Chambord, and you just tour these palaces that are filled with period furniture and just over the top ballrooms and decorations. It's beautiful. Of course, there's lots of churches and abbeys and historical towns. We were there for 10 days and we didn't even really get close to seeing everything. There's so much to do. But maybe part of that was because one of the things we learned how to do on this trip was how to eat like the French. What does that mean? Well, first of all, of course, they like to go to the marchés, the markets, and get fresh food and cook it for that day. That's home cooking. But eating out...
Which we did too.
But eating out, they do a little bit differently. They take their time. I don't think we're that very good at doing that in the United States.
Slowing down enough for a meal.
Slowing down. And
2 or 3 hours for lunch.
Right. So we would end up going to lunch a little after noon, probably 1 o'clock-ish. And we'd sit down, and these restaurants out in the middle of the Loire Valley and between the wine fields and stuff would have a meal of the day, a formule it's called. And so you basically might have a couple of choices in it, or you just get what's on there. And it's always 3 courses, your appetizer, your main, and your small dessert. So, and it takes a while. I mean, you're not going there and getting out of there in an hour. It would take at least 2.
Drinking wine and aperitifs and just having good conversation the whole time. Just
talking and eating and enjoying yourself. So we would ask the waiter, what is a good local wine to pair with the meal that we've chosen? And they always have an answer, and who knows if it's what they would choose or not. But we chose it. And we had it, and we never had one that was bad. And then we went, after we'd have dinner, after we had that lunch, we would go and we would find the winery. And we'd find that specific winery. We'd go and do a lot more tastings, no matter...
Tell them how the waiter recommended their wine, and they'd always get super excited about that. And they'd really turn on the charm and try to impress you and just really open up a lot, which was really cool.
So that week, I think we bought at least 7 cases of wine to take home with us. And then the one thing that we did do is we even tried a Michelin star restaurant in a place called Chateau de Pré. And it was fantastic. The tasting menu wasn't cheap. It was about 100 euros. But I think it was 12 courses.
Yeah, it was huge.
And
with wine pairings.
Yeah. So actually, it's a pretty cheap price for a Michelin star restaurant. And, it goes without saying, it was an amazing meal. That was my first Michelin star restaurant. And it lived up to the hype, I got to tell you. We've been to a few since then, but that was our first.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. The Loire Valley was full of medieval towns and markets.
And the thing about it is not that far from Paris, so go.
Yeah, like you said. Go into Paris, do some of the things that you need to do or want to do in Paris, and then take a week and go somewhere else in France, like the Loire Valley. Or another one of our favorite places is Alsace, which is in eastern France on the German border.
It's actually called Est France now. They've changed the province name because they've combined provinces. Okay. But it's still known as the Alsace region as well.
Yeah. And the Route de Vannes is the wine route there is just a phenomenal road to drive. I think it's 100 kilometers, just dotted with little medieval walled towns and castles on the hillsides. And of course, field after field of grapes and wineries that are also really impressive and fun to visit. But our favorite place in Alsace is really a very small town called Kinsheim. It is a medieval walled town, but I think there's one small street in it. There's maybe 3 or 4 different vintners that have offices on the main street. an old abbey, but not a whole lot. There's not a supermarket or anything like that. It's just a quiet little town that's in the middle of grape fields.
And even for the Rue de Vin, it's not one of the more popular towns.
Yeah, it's really not.
You've got other ones like Riquever and Rue Beauvalet, and there's other ones that are much more well known. And so this one's a little bit quieter.
So it's
and
nice.
It's just so
You're kind
pretty.
of away from all the crowds. And our favorite hotel is the Schwendi there, Hotel Schwendi, which is also a restaurant. I think we talked about that in a previous podcast where a lot of times in Europe, and you're finding this more around the world, where you have a small hotel where they also have a restaurant, and that's part of their draw is the quality of their restaurant. Well, I like to think of the Schwendi as a restaurant that just happens to have a hotel as well, which is really nice because the food is delicious and you're in France, you're in the middle of a famous wine region. You're going to be drinking the wine. This way you are already parked. You have a fabulous meal. I always get it's a trout that's been deboned and served whole on the plate in just a gorgeous beurre blanc sauce.
And I always get the lamb, which is amazing. But it's hard to say that because we do try to switch it up a little bit. We've gone every year for at least 8 years in a row. That's how much we love this place.
And we're really missing it now.
And we're missing it right now.
In 2 years now.
Let's book a ticket.
Maybe 3 years. I don't know. So that's one of our trips that we like to do in France is get to the Alsace. There's medieval castles. One of our favorite places also is Kaisersberg, where there's a little artisanal boulangerie. You get there early enough in the morning and the croissants are coming fresh out of the oven, and they are the most amazing buttery, flaky croissants on the planet.
And the line is out the door.
Yeah, but if you go too late, you won't get in.
But they're pretty good. And I mean, they're good at helping people. It's just really
also my favorite tarte flambeau place.
Tarte flambe, yeah.
It's there.
A tarte flambe is like a pizza, but it's not a pizza. And the traditional one has creme fraiche and ham and onions on it. But there's ones with all different toppings. They're delicious.
Goat cheese and fig and walnut. That's my favorite.
I've had all kinds of them.
And like a nice cream sauce on it. Yeah, so the Alsace is definitely one of our favorites. And you can spend a week there. Same thing, either pick one hotel and stay there, make that your point of operations and just take different day trips, or you can start at one end of the wine route and stay at a couple of different places along the way. Depending what time of year you're there, there's festivals all year long. One of our favorites is in Rue Beauvalet. It's a medieval festival with a massive parade that draws in villagers and townspeople from Rue Beauvalet and around it. And the floats are just incredibly ornate,
graphic,
usually very graphically in the what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know, but it's
not like horror, but it's pretty close to that. They can get a little scary for children.
But not enough so that I wouldn't take kids.
Yeah.
Because they probably wouldn't really realize what's going on. And the makeup and the costumes are fantastic.
It's just beautifully done.
And they have, all kinds of medieval food. On Sunday, they have wine pouring from the
town fountain.
I mean, it's just, how French.
And that's definitely one, if you want to go to, you need to plan it in advance. And maybe a year in advance and book a hotel room right in town.
And just stay there. You don't move because
just stay there.
It's great.
That hotel will usually have tables out on the street that you can also make sure you have a spot reserved on the table at the street. Have your meal, drink wine, watch as the world goes by, and then when the parade starts, just be ready to be amazed.
Yeah, and the other thing about Alsace is right on the border of Germany, so you can even take a jaunt over into Germany and do something over there if you wanted to.
Or tack it onto a trip to Germany.
Yeah. We love the Alsace. I'm sure you can tell. Another trip we took, which was just as good, but we've only done this once, is we did northern France, basically going up through Brittany and Normandy. You know, we're Americans, and we wanted to make sure that we were up seeing the Normandy beaches. And so we built a whole trip around it. We, again, stayed in a sheet. The one we stayed in was very nice. It wasn't as quaint and as perfect as the first one that we picked, but it had its own charms, and everybody was comfortable. And again, we had, you know, our kitchen and everything. So it was well worth it. It didn't have a whole lot of restaurants around it, and so we had to drive further to go out to eat. But it was great. We did things like, as we're driving around, all of Brittany is on the coast, of course. We were up on the coast. And so there's all these little fishing villages. One of our favorite fishing villages we went into, surprisingly enough, we found out afterwards, Anthony Bourdain had gone to.
Also one of his favorites.
Yeah. And what's there are oysters. And so it's really famous for their oysters. And the most famous was Anne de Boulogne. So we went there, just like Anthony did, and we ordered our oysters, and we, this little tiny hut, and we just sat outside.
Ate al fresco.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Delicious.
So wonderful.
Fresh.
And while we were there, it happened to be clamming season, and there was lots of people out on the
That's right.
on the banks clamming while we were having our oysters. We didn't go clamming because we didn't know about it ahead of time.
No, it's not something you just walk out and do.
Another thing we did find, though, as we were driving around, was here's this town, and they do this in the States too. They just put up the sign, and we're having our mussel fest. So they had trucks and pallets full of fresh mussels that they just pulled in, and that's all they served. There was just, you go out there. I think they had a bouncy castle, and they had mussels, and that was it.
Stage, I think, where there was some dancing.
There was some music. You're right.
And some music.
That was it, though. I mean, this is not a big fest. It was basically, you're coming here to eat mussels.
Eat mussels and drink apple cider.
And it was super yummy. So we honestly don't even know what town that was in. That's one reason we like to drive. So when we see things like that, we can take advantage of them.
Yeah, those unexpected
That's what makes the trip even that much more memorable. Some of the other places that we went on that trip, we went to Mont Saint Michel, and I mean, everybody wants to go to Mont Saint Michel. You've seen the pictures of this huge cathedral-like castle up on this hill in the middle of the bay, and it's as impressive as the pictures make it out to be. It's pretty darn cool. We went to St. Malo, which I had never heard of before, but it is a fortress town, stone wall. It's got a fortress out in the bay.
Old harbor. An
old harbor. I mean, just beautiful. And everywhere you go, the food is amazing.
Fresh seafood, yeah, everywhere.
And we found out it was an apple cider area, so we went to a couple of cideries, I think they're called, and learned a little bit about the processes there. And, of course, brought some home because what are you going to do? And, yeah, I mean, the idea of our trips, the way we like to do it is we have a list and we've hit those main points, but we also like to play it by ear. So that one was really good for playing by ear. And the Normandy beaches were one of the main reasons why we went. Were, you know, full of history. Thought-provoking. Good and also museums, beautiful beaches. Beautiful. The American Cemetery is beautiful. All of that. I can't stress enough how much fun we had and how wonderful the people were, and the food was great.
And that was another one of those 1 week trips, right?
It was just a 1 week trip, yeah.
Which is a really good way to do France. Pick a different region, get a gîte for a week, and explore that region. Of course, fly into Paris first or on the way out and spend some extra days on either end seeing more of Paris. There's always more to do there, but that way you don't get burned out on it. And another one of our favorite
last one
week-long trips, and this will be the last one we cover today, is southern France. Southern France, most people will think, first off, of course, of Cannes and Nice and those coastal towns.
Côte d'Azur.
Côte d'Azur.
Which is beautiful.
Right. But we're talking further south than that.
We've done that already.
So on this trip, there's things like Pont de Gard, which is this massive old Roman aqueduct that spans across the Gard River. Just one of the most beautiful places on earth. So that's like your entrance into the area.
And what we did there, we just put our feet in the water while people are kayaking and swimming under the aqueduct. And we didn't have our swimsuits. We just put our feet in the water. And you know what? Little fishes came and got our skin off. So it was just doing like Dr. Fish without having to pay the fee because it was part of the deal.
So on this trip, we actually had another gîte and we stayed in Montady.
Which is a tiny little place, but awesome.
Really small. Just a small town. It did have a cafe, which we ate in once, which was a great experience because it is just locals that are going in there. And they're always excited and interested to see who's renting the gîte on the hill. And it's up on a hill overlooking the town and overlooking an old, now drained etang, which at the time when we were there was just covered, this whole like 5-acre area covered in sunflowers. They were huge and ready for harvesting, I think. But a beautiful dried up lake that's still being used there. Little defensive tower up on the hill, old stone tower up on the hill. Just so much charm in this little town. But a really good place to branch out on day trips. So we went out to Roquefort-sur-Saulzone and we learned about Roquefort cheese and how it was first discovered that this moldy blue cheese is delicious. The story is something like a shepherd was eating his lunch in a little sheltered cave area, watching his sheep just outside the cave, and he saw his girlfriend down the hill. So he dropped his lunch and ran down the hill and forgot all about the lunch till a couple of months later when he just happened to be back in the area with his sheep and he found his lunch and the cheese had turned this strange color, but you're hungry. It's cheese. So he ate it and it was delicious and Roquefort was born, and they still make it kind of the same way. They have some special loaves of bread that they have baked for the cheesemakers. And they let them sit in a cave for 30 or 40 days, get it all moldy. They take that mold, they inject it into the cheese as it's starting to form, and it makes blue cheese delicious.
And the whole town's about blue cheese.
Yeah.
So every restaurant you went to had blue cheese dishes.
In some sort of Roquefort.
The market was full of blue cheese vendors. It's just a cool little place to go.
And they're very proud of it. And
they're very proud.
And if it's not made in that town with the milk from the cows of the area, or bread baked in that same sheep, or the bread that's been baked in the area a specific way, it cannot be called Roquefort. It can be called blue cheese, but it can't be called Roquefort unless it was made there. Really a fascinating place. One of our favorite medieval fortified cities, Carcassonne, is in that area. Another day trip. You can get into Andorra if you're trying to add another country to your country list in Europe.
Well, Andorra is only 17 kilometers long, so we actually drove the entire length as just a little jaunt from this area because why not?
Why not? Into Spain and did a little bit of northern Spain and then back up along the coast. This is the first place we came across a Vauban fortress.
And Vauban is an architect that lived in the 1700s. And he is credited for being a strategic genius in building fortresses. Napoleon loved Vauban so much that he dug up his body where it was buried and he took his heart out and he moved the heart to the museum in Paris, Les Invalides, where Napoleon is also buried, which is a great place to go, by the way, especially if you like military history like we do.
Yeah.
But
Montlouis is the fortress that we went to, and it's still being used by the French military. So when we were there was helicopters flying over this, old 18th century stone fortress, rappelling out of the helicopters and pretending to storm different areas.
It was great.
Really fascinating, but just a beautiful stone fortress. It's also, like I said, it's near the Spanish border, so there's a lot of Spanish influence. There's bullfights. They have the feria, the festivals, where this one feria we went to, right near the Spanish border, it was also the bullfight time, of course. They had the horses and all the men that were going to be participating in a parade through the main street. The whole town was out, kids included, drinking these small little 25 centiliter beers, but drinking them one after the other nonstop. I guess that way it stays cold while you drink it. I don't know. But it was
They
just
were enjoying themselves.
such an experience with the music and the dancing and, of course, good food. And just watching the whole town out there partying was so much fun. But that whole week-long trip is probably one of our highlights. It's not one of the more famous wine-growing regions, but it has been making a lot of inroads. I guess recently they've started a whole push to make their wines more known. And we had some good wines there as well.
I don't think we went anywhere in France where we didn't try lots of wine and have really good ones.
The only place that didn't really work was in Brittany, because there it was apple cider.
Apple ciders, but we still had wine.
You
up
still had
there.
good wine, but it wasn't a wine growing region.
That's
so
true.
yeah. So those are our favorite trips in France. Each of those would be a good week-long trip, 7 days,
9 days.
9 days.
Depends on what you want to do.
If you have 2 weeks, maybe a good week in Paris and another week in the Alsace or in the Loire or southern France or Brittany. I don't think you can go wrong.
You can't go wrong. They're all wonderful. Thanks for joining us at Streets and Eats, where we want to encourage you to savor the adventure. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and tell all your friends. Ciao for now.